Hey guys, hope you're all doing well. This is me back here again for another day. Uh, Today is the last day that we'll have that I am, I guess, talking directly to you guys. The other days I'll start posting the videos that I've already made for my other classes or for my other class. So I have videos already made up from where we will end up today and onward. So I will just keep posting those. So I won't have any specific information, or I won't have any specific videos to make for you guys. So today we'll be talking about I guess, the beginning of this Great Depression, getting into kind of the first efforts to end the Great Depression. So we will get into that today. You have on this classroom page that this video is on, you hopefully can find a copy of the notes. So basically what I give you is a bunch of notes, and they say topic 13 on it, which corresponds to my work in my classroom. So my textbook goes by topics. So topic 13 is the Great Depression. That's all you need to really use it for. That's the one we're on. So the topic 13 notes here, you will find that there are a bunch of numbers. They go from, this one goes from 1 to 16, and then there's a couple charts in this one. But at each of the numbers, you have a blank space. Essentially, that's a spot for you to write down any details that you might find important to kind of take notes as you listen along. I have also attached a copy of my master notes with all of my stuff attached to it, all of my notes on it, so you can use that. I would suggest probably listening to the video first and trying to take what you can take down in terms of notes, and then using the master notes to kind of fill in any gaps that you might see, or to look over at a later point. So both of those are posted there on this classroom page. So I would suggest getting the notes copy out, or the student copy, I guess it is probably called, or it might just be called Topic 13 Notes. Whatever it's called, I would get that. You could open it up and copy it, or just add to it on Google Docs, or you could also print it off and copy it down that way, or just get a notebook and copy it that way. Either way is fine. But we will be going through number 1 through 6 on that sheet today. And then tomorrow, the video that I've already made, I made it for my classes last week, that starts in with the chart there that's on the second page of the notes. So I think that's all I've got to begin with here. So we'll go ahead and we'll get started here with our notes. So I have I've also attached into that classroom page this PowerPoint, which has just a bunch of pictures in it and charts and different things like that I'll reference as I go through it. So that is there for you to see if you wanted to look back through that as well. So the causes of the Depression. We've already gone through most of these causes. There was one additional thing that I needed to mention that didn't really go on the chart that we worked on yesterday, so I'm putting it on here. Another thing that helped lead us to this Great Depression. It was actually supposed to be a solution for the Great Depression, but it ends up being a cause, and that would be the Hawley-Smoot Tariff. Hawley-Smoot Tariff. This is passed in June of 1930. The stock market crashed back in the fall of 1929. And so 1930, you end up with, in June, this tariff that gets passed in response to all the negative stuff that's happening because of the Depression. Tariffs, I always think of them as taxes on imported goods. So a tariff is just simply that, a tax on imported goods. So if you don't know that, you probably should. So write that down somewhere if you've not known that. So a tax on imported goods. So this Hawley-Smoot tariff is meant to tax imported goods, obviously, but it's meant to get the economy going a little bit more. When we talk about tariffs, we are almost always talking about protective tariffs. And a protective tariff just means it is a tariff that's passed in order to protect American businesses. Essentially, how a tariff works is let's use, for example, let's say that I own a company that makes t-shirts. And I can make t-shirts in America with American-made products. I can make them for $10 a shirt. And then I would need to sell them to other people. But normal people could buy my shirts for $10. Let's say that there's a company from, let's just say China currently, because that's where a lot of our products come from. Let's say China. China can make the product and ship it over here and sell it and still make a profit at $8 for a shirt. Okay, if you walk into a store and you see, oh, there's this American-made t-shirt versus this Chinese-made t-shirt, one of them is $8, one of them is $10. They both are about the same. Most people are probably going to buy the $8 t-shirts unless you have like a big made in America sort of mindset where you only try to buy stuff made in America, which some people do in America. But most people are going to say, you know, it's $8, let's buy that one. So the problem comes in where we look at American businesses and we say, okay, the government says, hey, your t-shirt factory, it's not going to be profitable. You're not going to make any money. You're not going to make any money selling your t-shirts for $10 because nobody's going to buy them. So what they do is they pass a tariff, a protective tariff. Essentially, let's say that they raise the cost of all goods coming into America. Let's say they raise it by, I don't know, 30%. It's about $3. 38%. It's about $3 for that t-shirt now. So they could sell the t-shirt instead of $8, sending it over here. The tariff would tack an additional $3 onto that. So then we would end up with a t-shirt, my t-shirt, which is $10. The Chinese-made t-shirt is $11. And now they buy my t-shirts. So it is a way to protect American businesses because my goods aren't imported. I don't pay that tariff. So that's kind of how Americans have used tariffs throughout the course of history. Now the problem is at this point, okay, this is a protective tariff. It's a little bit aggressive. It was, I want to say it was high 20s, low 30s, if I remembered correctly, in terms of percentages that is charged on imported goods. So the problem here is that European countries are feeling the same effects, the same depression as we are in America. So what they do is they say, hey, we don't like the fact that you guys are taxing our goods that we're trying to sell to you guys. So we're going to go ahead and raise tariffs on all other goods coming into Europe. So American-made goods, we couldn't sell them in Europe. We would be paying higher prices there. So the problem, all that this ends up doing is making it so that our companies can't sell their products as easily around the world. And also another side effect of a tariff. Okay, let's use my t-shirt example. Before the tariff, you could have purchased, as a consumer, you could have purchased a t-shirt for $8. Now the cheapest t-shirt you can purchase under the tariff is $10. Regardless of who makes it, you have to pay more for the products that you purchase. So tariffs in themselves raise prices on consumers. So the Hawley-Smoot tariff, while it was designed to be a solution to the depression, it ends up being kind of another cause by saying, oh, hey, the depression is raising prices on most Americans, and most Americans can't afford these things. So that's kind of an issue here, and that is what's the Hawley-Smoot tariff. So let's move on. I've got some pictures here that I already showed you yesterday, so we're going to go past those. Okay, on to number 2. Those were just pictures of Hoovervilles and Dust Bowls and bread lines and whatnot. So on to number 2. We've got a heading there, 2 presidents respond, and we've got a heading, Hoover responds with volunteerism. We had mentioned Herbert Hoover yesterday and how Hoover takes control of the country. He kind of inherited a situation where I don't know, the Depression just kind of began and he kind of had to fix it. He was only president for like 7 months before the Depression started, before the stock market crashed. So he didn't really have a lot of time to do anything that he really wanted to do. He kind of had to deal with the Depression completely. So what does he do though? he ends up kind of advocating for volunteers, as it says in the title there. He wanted business owners, he wanted labor unions to work together to try to help out normal people, help out individuals. He's relying on charities. I'm sorry, I don't know why I'm yawning so much. He's relying on charities here to kind of take the lead. He thinks that it is not the government's job to come in and pull Americans out of this depression. The government does not do that. That is not something that the government has ever been able to do or has ever needed to do. So the government doesn't do that. The government, their job is to stand by and make laws that make it easier for certain things like that to happen. Make it easier for people to do business. Make it easier for people to, I don't know, get better treatment. But the government doesn't. The government's job is not to step in, according to Hoover. It's not to step in and provide relief to Americans. So he relies, like I said, on churches, on charities, on charitable organizations, businesses. Their main goal at this point should be to help people out. They should be giving whatever they can give to be able to help people out. I'm sorry. I don't know why. It's this after. I'm recording this on Monday afternoon, and it's an afternoon nap time apparently. I don't know. He favors the idea, and I've got this written on my board over here. Favors the idea of rugged individualism. Okay, rugged individualism. What that means, and a phrase that we use here in America that you may or may not have heard of is the phrase of pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. What that means is that if you're a worker and you're wearing boots, you've got bootstraps, which are the things that, I don't know, you put the boot on with, I guess. You could say your shoelaces or something like that. But you're pulling yourself up. You are getting yourself out of this problem. Rugged individualism means that you are getting yourself out of this issue. It is not the government's job to step in and fix your problems. It is your problem, and you need to do it. And you will be measured by your own success in that way. So rugged individualism, it's a little bit of a, I don't know, inhumane, maybe people would say nowadays, but it is a common perspective for a lot of people. You know, if you get into a problem, you got to take every effort to get yourself out of that problem, and I think that still holds true. It's a little harsh, a lot of people would say, though. So it is kind of what it is. Okay, let's move on to the next thing. Hoover actually tries to use the government here. That's like yawn number 3 or 4, by the way. Tries to use the government here to get the economy under control. He passes a law that creates this organization called the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, the RFC, as we call it. The RFC is a kind of like a government program to give out money to businesses and banks. Okay, imagine here you've got all these banks that have just failed. You've got these companies that are failing and going bankrupt. You've got railroad companies who can't afford to do business anymore. You've got just random businesses that are having issues here at this time. So this Reconstruction Finance Corporation, it gives money out to these groups in form of loans to be able to kind of keep the economy going. This is an example of what I've got pictured over here, or what I've got listed over here, called trickle-down economics. Trickle-down economics is an economic philosophy where you dump money into the top part of American society and then it trickles down. I think of trickle-down economics as like this nice fountain with different levels. And the bottom level is the biggest, and the top level is smaller, and the top level is the smallest. You pour money at the top level, and it spills over into the middle level, and then that fills up, and it spills over into the bottom level. That's what I think of when I think of trickle-down economics. So you have trickle down. It trickles down from the top. You pour money into the top classes, the top areas of society, and then it goes down to the bottom from there. Everybody should benefit from it. If you think about how this would work in a perfect world, you would have business owners who would then have extra money. They could hire more workers. Those workers would then make more products, and those products could be sold to people who have more money, and then that more money goes to the business owners, and they can hire more workers, and it turns into a cycle of economic growth. So that's the plan with trickle-down economics. The problem is at this point, most Americans who get this money kind of just hold on to it. They weren't. They were not doing the right thing. They were holding on to the money that they got and didn't spend it. Didn't hire more workers. Didn't do anything like that. So it was a negative thing. Trickle-down economics did not work. Trickle-down economics does work sometimes in American history. We will, maybe not we, but you guys will eventually talk about the 1980s, and Ronald Reagan ends up using trickle-down economics pretty successfully in the 1980s to bring a lot of economic growth to America, and he gets pretty popular because of that. At this point, though, it is not entirely successful. So that is kind of the deal with that. Let me go ahead and get this pulled back up here. Okay. Number 4, the bonus army. Okay, so the bonus army here. The bonus army was a kind of a, I don't know, it's an interesting thing. Basically, so think about this, okay? During World War I, there were 5 million Americans, give or take, who fought in the war. 5 million Americans. They were promised a payment, a cash payment, a bonus, if you will. Oftentimes people give out bonuses to their workers, or it's just an extra payment on top of any wages that you may have earned. They were given a bonus because we were happy with how they fought in the war. And so this bonus was set up to be delivered over 25 years after the war was over. So the war ended in 1918. All these American troops were brought home, 1918, 1919. The bonus was set to be paid out in 1945. So it was supposed to be these young people who would have been in World War I. By the time they get older, they'd be 45, 50 years old. They are able to get a bonus in 1945 and be able to, would they be 45? Yeah, 45 or 50, yeah. So they would be able to get a little bit of extra money. Maybe they're thinking about retirement, all that stuff. So that's kind of the plan with this bonus army. The problem is, at this point, a lot of these veterans are saying, I wish we had this money sooner. We could really use the money right now. We're in the middle of this depression. Why not give out the money now? The government has money that they can give out, so why not give it out now? They need it. So what ends up happening here is a group of veterans end up marching to Washington, D.C. They are pictured here in this image. They are standing on the steps of the Capitol building, and they get the nickname the Bonus Army because they're veterans and they're looking for their bonus, or they're fighting for their bonuses. So what ends up happening, there is a bill that gets proposed in 1932, and these guys are there in 1932. So the Depression's been going on for 3-4 years at this point. So this bill gets proposed, and the bill ends up getting voted down. Enough people said, no, we don't have the money to be spending on these veterans to be giving it out. What ends up happening is the protesters stay there, and then an interesting thing, when you stay on a federal property for too long and people don't want you there anymore, they can demand that you leave. The government can demand that you leave, and if you don't leave, that's a crime. So they end up with, let me go ahead and get this here. So they end up sending in, Herbert Hoover ends up sending in the Army, the United States Army and the National Guard to go in and basically remove these bonus army protesters out of there. So we're talking like bayonets and tear gas and all that stuff that's here, trying to get these bonus army veterans out of there. So as you can tell, this picture is not a very good look for America. This is the Army attacking veterans, and that is not a good look. So this kind of shows that Hoover just doesn't really know what's going on. He just does not. He's not really the right guy for the job. So it's a very bad look. So now we get into the next guy. Herbert Hoover ran for re-election, was not re-elected, surprisingly. That's a little bit of sarcasm there. Instead, the United States ends up electing a Democrat who is, his name is Franklin D. Roosevelt, FDR. FDR, that's just his initials there. FDR is well known and viewed by most Americans and most historians as one of the top 3 presidents in American history, along with George Washington and Abraham Lincoln. But he is viewed right up there as a very high-ranking president, and that's kind of his deal. So FDR here, he gets elected. He was the governor of New York at the time, and he really didn't have that hard of a job to get elected. He was facing off against Hoover, who kind of oversaw this massive rise in unemployment. Unemployment was at 25% at this point, so a lot of people don't like what Hoover's doing. It's not the coronavirus, I promise. So FDR ends up winning. He promises to bring what he nicknames a New Deal to America. He wants to give the American people a new opportunity to kind of have growth during this time period, a new opportunity for growth, a new opportunity for economic growth. So it is going to be a change in the course of action from the government's perspective. If you think specifically about what I was saying earlier about Herbert Hoover and how Hoover did not think that it was the government's job to essentially didn't think it was the government's job to fix the Depression. It was normal people's job. It was businesses' jobs. It was charities' jobs. FDR is kind of the exact opposite. He says it is nobody else's job except for the government. It is the government's job. The government has to step in and fix this issue. So what he ends up doing here, like I said, he promises a New Deal for the American people. So we'll get into the New Deal, and you'll see a video on that tomorrow. Before we get there, I've got to talk about some of the new techniques that FDR uses to end up kind of pushing the Great Depression, I guess trying to get rid of the Great Depression or pushing his agenda forward. So what he does is he starts using new technologies, specifically radio. Radio was coming into usage during the 1920s in large capacities, late 1910s, early 1920s. More people were using the radio, and most families had one. By the end of the decade, I want to say almost every family had a radio in their house by the end of the 1920s. So what ends up happening here, he uses the radio to broadcast live speeches, and he ends up giving talks to the American people to try to get them so that they feel a little bit more calm about this whole depression. So he is pictured here in this. He's in a radio studio here, so you see some famous names: NBC, CBS, the famous news services. He gave a series of what are called fireside chats, which is in the heading there. So fireside chats are this idea that FDR had. He pictures himself coming into the radio, and he's entering people's living rooms, not literally, but he's like broadcasting into people's living rooms, and he is able to talk directly to them, just like he's sitting down right next to the fireside, right next to the fire, just talking with normal Americans. So that is his goal here with the fireside chats, just to speak and hear a little bit from the American, or give a little bit of conversation to the American people here, just so that they can hear from him. You want to hear from your leaders in times of crisis. During this time in American history, during our time currently, the governor of New York, the president of the United States, both of them are like talking every single day to the people because people want to hear from them. People want to hear what's new. People want to hear what's going on with this virus. So that is a common technique here. And FDR's one of the first people to use this. These fireside chats end up continuing all the way throughout the Depression as a way for people to just hear from the president. Now, FDR had a very productive first little while as president. He was one of the most productive presidents in American history. I guess in consideration of the amount of laws that he passed. If you think about it, most presidents don't actually pass a ton of laws at the very beginning when they first become president. FDR had 15 major pieces of legislation, 15 major laws that he had passed in his first 100 days being president. So for the first 3.5 months, he was passing 15 major laws. Most of these major laws were dealing directly with the Depression and trying to get us out of this Depression. And some of those laws we'll talk about tomorrow. But he kind of sets the standard for being the first 100 days. The amount of productivity that he had kind of becomes a benchmark to say, okay, how's the president doing? They've been president for about 3.5 months now, 3 months and a week. How are they doing? What have they passed? How have they done? All that stuff. Just trying to keep, I guess, make sure that everybody's kind of on the, make sure that everybody is kind of on the same page with how presidents are doing. So that kind of becomes a benchmark, like I said. So that's all I've got for this first part. We are going to get into tomorrow. I've got some laws that end up getting passed with the New Deal. The New Deal kind of becomes the nickname for all of FDR's legislation that is passed at this point, all of the laws that he passes. So we will go into tomorrow, like I said, we'll get into specifically talking about these major laws that are passed, and then get into kind of some criticisms of the New Deal too. So I've already got that video made. I made it last week, so I will post that tomorrow. I'll post that tomorrow for you guys. So that'll be the deal. Again, I would, I guess, look back through. If you need to pause this video at any point, you can do that. If you need to, you can kind of replay it, rewatch it if you need to. But essentially, hopefully everything there is self-explanatory based on what I was just saying. So everything should be able to be found online again. But I'll post more stuff tomorrow. This will be the last moment for a little while that I'll talk directly to you guys. Otherwise, we're just kind of talking to the rest of my class. For the rest of my lectures, I end up having questions at the very end. I'm not going to post those for you guys just because I had my classes do that so then I could grade it. So disregard that part of the video when it talks about essential questions to answer. Disregard that, but otherwise you can just kind of watch the notes and follow along, so then you feel like you're getting good information that way. So as always, if anybody feels like they want to reach out or talk about something, email me. My email's there on Google Classroom, or I think you could probably email somewhere else. There's probably a button to push on there somewhere, so you can figure that out. Otherwise, but again, if anybody's got any questions, please reach out, and I'll check in with you guys probably at a later point. I'm not sure when, but for the rest of the week, I'll keep posting those other videos. So I think that's all I've got. I think I'm done for the day, so I'll sign off there, and I guess you'll hear from me tomorrow. See ya.